There is something every species in the galaxy understood from birth. The universe was old. It was vast. It was full of civilizations that had risen, conquered, and faded long before the light of their stars ever reached the small blue world spinning quietly on the edge of the Orion Arm. Humanity was young. Humanity was small. Humanity was, by every measurement the Galactic Council used, irrelevant. And for a very long time, that was perfectly fine with everyone. The older races had their empires. They had their trade routes, their ancient laws, their comfortable seats on the council floor. They did not worry about the humans. Why would they? Worrying about humans was like worrying about ants building a hill near the foot of a mountain. It was beneath notice. It was beneath concern. But mountains, as the galaxy was about to learn, should never ignore what grows at their feet. 'Cause sometimes the ants are not really ants at all. Sometimes they are something far worse, something patient, something angry, and something that remembers every single wound it has ever been given. The message arrived on a Tuesday morning, Earth Standard Time. It came through the quantum relay that the Galactic Council had installed in orbit around Mars 3 years earlier when humanity had been formally acknowledged as a minor species, not a member, not a partner, just acknowledged. The relay was a gift, the Council said, a gesture of welcome. In truth, it was a leash, a way to monitor what the humans were doing without actually having to visit them. The message was short. It was official. It carried the golden seal of the Galactic Council, the interlocking rings that represented the 47 member species who governed the known galaxy. Captain Alara Voss read it from the bridge of the UEN Resolve, Earth's largest deep space vessel. She read it once. Then she read it again. Then she set the datapad down on the console and stared out the viewport at the black emptiness between stars. The message said that the Dralith Dominion had filed a formal territorial claim over the Kepler 442 system. The same system where Earth had established its first colony outside the solar system. The same system where 18,000 human beings were living, farming, building schools, raising children. The Council had reviewed the claim. The Council had determined that the Dralith claim was valid under Section 9 of the Galactic Territorial Accord, a law written 4,000 years before humans had even discovered fire. The colony had 90 standard days to evacuate. If the colonists did not leave, the Dralith would be within their legal rights to remove them by force. Alara picked up the datapad again. She looked at the final line of the message. It read, "The Council trusts that humanity will comply peacefully and recognizes that this matter is settled." She turned to her communications officer, Lieutenant Ravi Okafor. He was watching her with wide eyes. He had read the same message. "Get me a secure line to Earth Command," Alara said. Her voice was calm. Too calm. Ravi had served with her for 6 years. He knew what that voice meant. It meant she was not calm at all. It meant the storm was building somewhere behind her eyes where no one could see it. "Yes, Captain," Ravi said, and turned to his station. Alara looked back at the stars. 18,000 people. Families. Children who had been born under an alien sky and called it home. And some ancient council of creatures who had never set foot on that world, who had never breathed its air or felt its rain, had decided with the stroke of a digital pen that those people did not belong there, that their homes meant nothing, that their lives were an inconvenience to be swept aside. She thought about her sister Mira, who had moved to the Kepler colony 2 years ago with her husband and their daughter Sana, little Sana, who had just turned 4, who loved to collect the strange purple stones that dotted the riverbeds near the colony, who called the twin moons her nightlights. Alara closed her eyes. When she opened them, they were hard. The news spread across Earth like wildfire. Within hours, every screen on every continent was carrying the story. The Galactic Council had ruled against humanity. The Kepler colony was to be abandoned. The Dralith were coming. People reacted the way humans always react when they feel threatened. There was shock first, then confusion, then anger. And the anger grew fast. In the halls of the United Earth Nations headquarters in Geneva, an emergency session was called. Representatives from every country on the planet filled the great circular chamber. The air was thick with tension. Voices overlapped. Fists struck tables. Secretary General David Chen stood at the central podium and waited for silence. It took a long time coming. When it finally arrived, it was the kind of silence that presses against your chest, the kind that holds its breath. "I will be direct," Chen said. His voice carried across the chamber with the weight of a man who understood exactly what was at stake. The Galactic Council has given us 90 days to abandon our colony. They have sided with the Dralith Dominion, a species that has never visited the Kepler system, never developed it, never cared about it until we made it valuable. And they expect us to simply walk away. He paused. He looked around the room. Every face was watching him. I want to be clear about what this means. This is not a legal dispute. This is not a misunderstanding. This is a test. The Council wants to see if we will bend. The Dralith want to see if we will break. They believe we are too small, too young, too weak to push back. They believe that we will do what every minor species before us has done. They believe we will comply. He let those words hang in the air. I have spoken with our military commanders. I have spoken with our scientists. I have spoken with the colonial governor of Kepler 42. And I have spoken with the families who live there. His jaw tightened. No one is leaving. The chamber erupted. Some cheered. Some shouted warnings. Some demanded to know if Earth could survive a war with the Dralith, who had a fleet 500 times the size of humanity's small navy. Chen raised his hand. The noise subsided. I am not declaring war. I am declaring that we will not comply with an unjust order. There is a difference. But make no mistake, if war comes to us, we will not run from it. On the Galactic Council station, a massive ring-shaped structure orbiting the ancient world of Thessera Prime, the reaction to Earth's defiance was one of mild amusement. Ambassador Cale Voran of the Thesseran Collective was the current speaker of the council. He was tall, thin, with silver skin and eyes like polished obsidian. He had held his seat for over 200 years. He had seen species rise and fall. He had brokered peace between empires that spanned 1,000 star systems. A single colony of primates on the edge of nowhere was not something that troubled his sleep. They refused? He asked, reading the report with the faintest hint of a smile. His aide, a small Rivian with 4 arms and a nervous disposition, nodded rapidly. They sent a formal rejection of the council's ruling speaker. Their Secretary-General gave a speech. It was quite emotional. Of course it was, Cale said. Humans are emotional creatures. It is their most defining trait and their greatest weakness. They feel everything so deeply that they cannot see clearly. They will bluster and shout and wave their little fists, and then they will realize that they have no choice. They will leave. And if they do not, Cale set down the report, then the Dralith will remove them, and humanity will learn the lesson that every young species must learn. The galaxy does not care about your feelings. It cares about power, and they have none. But Cale Voran, for all his centuries of experience, had made an error. It was a small error, the kind that does not look like much until it grows into something enormous. He had assumed that humanity's anger was like the anger of other young species he had seen. Loud, hot, and brief, the kind that burns fast and leaves nothing but ashes. He did not understand that human anger was different. Human anger was not a fire. It was a forge. It did not consume. It created. It took raw pain and raw fury and hammered them into something hard, something sharp, something that could cut through anything in its path. On Earth, the forges were already burning. Deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, in a facility that did not exist on any public record, General Aisha Ambeki stood before a wall of screens. Each screen showed a different feed, satellite imagery of Dralith fleet movements, communications intercepts from Council relay stations, technical readouts from classified weapons programs that had been running in secret for the past decade. Earth's public military was small. The Council knew about 37 ships, most of them patrol vessels and cargo haulers with basic defensive weapons. That was what the quantum relay had been reporting. That was what the Council believed. But the relay only saw what Earth wanted it to see. General Mbeki had spent the last 10 years building something else. Something that the Council's surveillance had never detected because it existed in places the Council never thought to look. In asteroid belts, in deep space, in the hollow cores of moons that appeared dead and empty on every scan. Project Blackthorn. It had started as a contingency plan, a what-if scenario that a group of military strategists had drawn up after first contact, when it became clear that the galaxy was not the friendly neighborhood humanity had hoped for. The plan was simple in concept and terrifying in execution. If Earth was ever truly threatened, if diplomacy failed, If the big powers of the galaxy decided that humanity was expendable, then humanity would not go quietly. It showed a fleet. Not 37 ships. Not 100. 412 warships built in secret over a decade, each one incorporating every piece of alien technology that Earth scientists had been able to study, reverse engineer, and improve upon. Because that was the thing about humans that the galaxy had not yet figured out. Humans did not just copy. They improved. They took apart. They understood. They rebuilt. They cost. And what they rebuilt was always better than the original. The ships were not elegant. They were not beautiful like the sweeping silver vessels of the Thessaran fleet or the crystalline cruisers of the Riven Armada. They were angular. They were heavy. They were built to fight. And they had been waiting, silent and patient, for a reason to wake up. On the Kepler colony, life continued with a tension that sat over everything like a second sky. The colonists had received Secretary General Chen's message. They were not leaving, but they were afraid. Of course they were afraid. They were farmers and teachers and engineers, not soldiers. They had built their homes with their hands. They had planted crops in alien soil and watched them grow. They had fallen in love with this world, with its purple stones and twin moons and the way the wind sang through the crystal formations in the northern mountains. Governor Lena Vasquez walked through the colony's central square every morning. She spoke with people. She listened to their fears. She held the hands of mothers who could not sleep and looked into the eyes of fathers who were trying to be brave. And every morning, she told them the same thing. Earth has not forgotten us. Earth will not abandon us. She said it with conviction. She said it like she believed it completely. But late at night, alone in her office, she stared at the communication console and wondered if it was true. Earth was one planet. The Dralith controlled 60 star systems. Their fleet was massive. Their technology was centuries ahead of anything humanity had publicly shown. She did not know about Project Blackthorn. Almost no one did. But she knew her people. She knew that the colonists had already begun preparing in their own way. The engineers had started reinforcing the colony structures. The miners had begun stockpiling materials. The hunters who tracked the native wildlife for the colony's food supply had started mapping the wilderness in case evacuation into the mountains became necessary. They were not warriors, but they were human. And humans, when pushed into a corner, have a very old habit of pushing back. 60 days before the Council's deadline, the Dralith sent a delegation to the Kepler system. 3 warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel and took up orbit around the colony world. They were enormous. Each one was longer than anything humanity had ever built. Their hulls gleamed with a dark metallic sheen, and weapon ports lined their sides like rows of teeth. The lead ship hailed the colony. Commander Drail Thavik appeared on the colony's main screen. He was Dralith, which meant he was broad, scaled with a face that looked like it had been carved from stone. His eyes were yellow with vertical pupils, and when he spoke, his voice had a low resonance that vibrated in the chest. "I am Commander Thavik of the Dralith Dominion," he said. "I am here to oversee the evacuation of this system. You have 60 days remaining. I advise you to begin immediately." Governor Vasquez stood before the screen. She was a small woman, barely reaching the shoulder of most of her colonists. But she had a spine made of something the Dralith had not encountered before. "Commander," she said, "with all due respect, we are not evacuating. This is our home. We built it. We will not leave it." Thavik stared at her, his pupils narrowed to thin slits. In Dralith culture, defiance from a weaker species was not just unexpected, it was offensive. It was like a prey animal baring its teeth at a predator. Absurd. Almost laughable. "You misunderstand," he said. "This is not a negotiation. The Council has ruled. The law is clear. You will leave or you will be removed. Then you will have to remove us," Vasquez said. There was a long silence. Tavik's jaw worked slowly, the muscles beneath his scales tightening and releasing. Then he spoke, and his voice was very quiet. "I was told that humans were emotional, but rational. That you understood power. That you would see the mathematics of your situation and accept reality." He leaned closer to the screen. "I see now that I was misinformed. You are not rational. You are simply too stupid to be afraid." He cut the transmission. Vasquez stood there for a moment after the screen went dark. Her hands were shaking. But her voice, when she spoke to the room full of colonists who had gathered behind her, was steady. "Well," she said, "I think that went about as well as we could have expected." A few people laughed. It was a nervous laugh, the kind that comes out when the only alternative is crying. But it was something. It was human. Back on Earth, General Mbeki watched the recording of the exchange. She watched it 3 times. She watched Thavic's face. She studied the weapon signatures of his ships. She noted the formation they had taken in orbit, the way they positioned themselves to cover all angles of approach. Then she opened a secure channel to Secretary General Chen. "It is time," she said. Chen was silent for a long moment. She could hear him breathing on the other end of the line. "How long do you need?" he asked. 30 days to move everything into position. Then we will be ready." Another pause. "And you are certain this will work?" Mbeki thought about the ships hidden in the asteroid belts. She thought about the weapons her engineers had built. She thought about the training exercises that had been run 10,000 times in simulation. She thought about the men and women who had volunteered for this, who had spent years in secret, away from their families, preparing for a day they hoped would never come. "I am certain," she said, "that they will never see us coming." Chen let out a long breath. "Do it!" She turned to her command staff, a room full of the best military minds on Earth. They were already watching her. They already knew. "Activate Blackthorn," she said. And deep in the silent places of space, in hollowed-out moons and hidden stations, and the dark gaps between asteroids where no one ever looked, lights began to flicker on. Engines began to hum. Systems that had been dormant for years powered up with a low, steady growl. And humanity was done asking permission. The galaxy had a rhythm. It had been beating for millions of years, steady and predictable like the pulse of something ancient and unshakable. Empires rose along the spiral arms. Trade flowed through the hyperspace corridors like blood through veins. The Galactic Council sat at the center of it all, old and heavy and certain that nothing in the universe could surprise it anymore. That rhythm was about to stop. Not slow down, not stutter. Stop. And the silence that followed would be the loudest thing any of them had ever heard. 30 days passed on Earth in a blur of controlled chaos. On the surface, life appeared normal. People went to work. Children went to school. The news channels debated the Kepler crisis endlessly, with politicians giving speeches about standing firm, and diplomats suggesting that perhaps a compromise could be reached. It all looked exactly the way the Council expected it to look. Noise. Emotion. Indecision. The standard behavior of a species that was in over its head and did not know what to do about it. Beneath the surface, everything was moving. General Mbeki ran operations from the Blackthorn Command Center, buried deep enough underground that no scanner from orbit could detect the electromagnetic signatures of her equipment. She slept in 4-hour blocks on a cot in the corner of her office. She ate meals standing up. She reviewed fleet positions every 6 hours and ran combat simulations every 12. The 412 ships of the Blackthorn fleet were moving through deep space in complete silence, running on minimal power, following routes that kept them hidden behind stellar debris and electromagnetic interference zones. They moved in small groups, never more than 15 ships at a time, drifting through the darkness like shadows moving between shadows. Each ship carried technology that the galaxy had never seen combined in the way Earth's engineers had combined it. The hulls were layered with a material that Earth's scientists had developed by studying the light-bending properties of Thessaran stealth coatings and then pushing the concept 3 generations further. The engines ran on a modified version of the Rivean quantum drive, except that Earth's version was quieter and produced almost no detectable energy wake. The weapons were something else entirely. The Council species had energy weapons. Plasma cannons, particle beams, elegant, precise, devastating. Earth had studied all of them. Earth had learned from all of them. And then, Earth had gone in a different direction. Earth's weapons were kinetic. Mass drivers that could accelerate a tungsten rod to a significant fraction of the speed of light. At those velocities, the impact energy was beyond anything a plasma cannon could match. There was no shield technology in the known galaxy that had been designed to stop a solid projectile moving that fast because no species in the known galaxy had ever been primitive enough to still use projectiles. They had all moved past that. They had evolved beyond throwing rocks. Humans had not. Humans had just learned to throw rocks harder. Commander Thavic, orbiting the Kepler colony with his 3 warships, spent the 30 days growing increasingly impatient. He sent daily messages to the colony demanding compliance. Governor Vasquez responded to each one with the same polite refusal. After the first week, Tavik stopped being polite in return. After the second week, he began making threats. After the third week, he requested reinforcements from the Draelith Dominion, citing the humans' continued defiance as a potential security concern. The Draelith High Command was not particularly worried. They had reviewed Earth's known military capabilities and found them laughable. 37 ships, a handful of orbital defense platforms around Earth and Mars, some ground-based missile systems that were generations behind current galactic standards. The idea that humanity could pose a real threat was, in the words of Jerail Fleet Admiral Gorath Sen, absurd. But Thavik was a cautious commander, and the Draelth believed in overwhelming force as a matter of principle. So they sent reinforcements. 40 additional warships jumped into the Kepler system and took up positions alongside Thavik's original 3. It was an intimidation display, a wall of dark metal and weapon ports hanging in orbit above a colony of farmers. On Earth, General Mbeki watched the reinforcements arrive on her long-range sensors. She noted their positions, their formation patterns, their shield frequencies. Her analysts had been studying Draelith military doctrine for years. She knew how they fought. She knew how they thought. She knew their strengths, which were many. And she knew their weaknesses, which were fewer but very real. The biggest weakness was arrogance. The Draelith did not believe they could lose. And because they did not believe they could lose, they did not prepare for the possibility. With 20 days remaining before the deadline, Secretary General Chen addressed the Galactic Council directly. He sent a formal appeal through the quantum relay, requesting an emergency session to reconsider the Kepler ruling. He argued that the Draelith claim was based on a law written before humanity existed. He argued that the colonists had a moral right to their home. He argued for fairness. He argued for justice. The Council's response arrived within hours. The appeal was denied. The ruling stood. Humanity was advised once again to comply. Chen read the response in his office. General Mbeki was there. So was Admiral James Whitmore, who commanded Earth's public naval forces from the UEN headquarters in Singapore. So was Dr. Cabby, Sarah Okonkwo, the head of Earth's intelligence division, who had spent the last 10 years building a spy network that stretched across a dozen star systems without the Council ever knowing it existed. That is that then, Chen said. He set down the datapad. They will not listen. They were never going to listen, Dr. Okonkwo said. She had been saying this from the beginning. She was a quiet woman with sharp eyes and a mind that worked like a blade. She never raised her voice. She never had to. The Council does not see us as equals. They see us as a nuisance. You cannot negotiate with someone who does not believe you have the right to sit at the table. Chen nodded slowly. He looked at Mbeki. General, what is the status of Blackthorn? All fleet elements are in position, Mbeki said. Strike groups are holding in 3 locations. Alpha Group is in the Kepler system's outer asteroid belt, undetected. Beta Group is positioned along the Draelith supply corridor between their home systems and Kepler. Gamma Group is in reserve near the Thesara Relay Junction. Chen raised an eyebrow? The Thesara Relay Junction? That is Council territory. Yes, sir, Mbeki said. She did not elaborate. Chen studied her for a moment. Then he understood. Gamma Group was not there to fight the Draelith. Gamma Group was there to send a message to the Council itself. How many Draelith ships are at Kepler now? Chen asked. 43, Mbeki said. We expect that number to remain stable. Their main battle fleet is deployed along their border with the Vorath hegemony. They consider this a police action, not a military campaign. They have sent enough force to intimidate colonists, not to fight a war. And if they send more, they will not have time. Chen looked around the room. These were the 4 people who held the fate of humanity in their hands. A politician, a general, an admiral, a spy master. 4 people standing in a quiet office about to change the course of galactic history. When? Chen asked. Mbeki did not hesitate. 12 days from now. 3 days before the deadline expires. They will not expect us to move before the deadline. They will be complacent. Their guard will be at its lowest. Chen closed his eyes. He was a man who believed in peace. He had spent his entire career building bridges, finding common ground, and searching for solutions that did not involve violence. But he was also a man who understood that sometimes bridges burned, common ground crumbled, and the only solution left was the one no one wanted. "Authorize it," he said. On day 77 of the 90-day countdown, 3 days before the deadline, the Blackthorn fleet moved. It began at 0300 hours Kepler colony time. The colonists were sleeping. Commander Thavik was on his flagship, reviewing the final evacuation logistics. His crew was relaxed. Some were even bored. This assignment had been nothing but waiting, and the Draelith were not a patient species. They wanted to get this over with, round up the stubborn little humans, and go home. The first sign that something was wrong was a sensor glitch. One of the Draelith destroyers on the outer edge of the formation reported a brief anomaly, a flicker of mass where there should have been nothing. The sensor officer ran a diagnostic. The system came back clean. He logged the anomaly and moved on. He should not have moved on. 12 minutes later, the Alpha Strike Group dropped out of silent running simultaneously. 140 human warships appeared in a spear around the Draelith formation, materializing out of the darkness like they had been conjured from nothing. One moment, the space around Kepler was empty. The next moment, it was full of angular, heavy, utterly alien-looking ships that the Draelith had never seen before. Commander Thavik was on his bridge within seconds. His officers were shouting. Alarms were blaring. Sensor screens that had been showing nothing but empty space were suddenly crowded with hostile contacts. "What is this?" Thavik demanded. His voice was sharp, but there was something beneath it that had never been there before. Something that sounded almost like uncertainty. "Unknown vessels, Commander," his sensor officer reported. 140 contacts. They appeared simultaneously. No hyperspace signatures detected. They were already here. Thavik stared at the tactical display. The human ships had positioned themselves with terrifying precision. Every Draelith vessel was covered from multiple angles. There were no gaps, no blind spots, no escape routes. This was not the flailing response of a desperate species. This was a trap, and his entire force had walked straight into it. A communication came through. It was on an open channel, broadcasting to every Draelith ship simultaneously. "Commander Thavik!" The voice was female, calm, controlled. "This is Captain Alara Voss of the United Earth Navy vessel Resolve. You are surrounded. Your ships are outgunned and outpositioned. I'm offering you one chance to withdraw your forces from this system peacefully."
You have 5 minutes to respond.
Outgunned? These were human ships, primitive, inferior. His fleet had shields, plasma cannons, technology refined over centuries of warfare. These crude-looking vessels could not possibly match Draelith firepower. "Human," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "You have made a grave mistake. I do not know where you found these ships, but quantity does not equal quality. My fleet will tear through yours like paper. Stand down or be destroyed." "Or minutes," Alara said. She closed the channel. Thavik immediately ordered his fleet into a combat formation. The Draelith warships began repositioning, their shields powering up, their weapons charging. They moved with the practiced efficiency of a species that had fought wars across the galaxy for 1,000 years. On the bridge of the Resolve, Alara watched the Draelith formation shift. She had studied Draelith combat tactics for years. She knew exactly what formation they would choose. She knew where their strongest ships would go. She knew the gaps in their shield coverage during the transition from patrol to combat configuration. General Mbecki's voice came through on a secure channel from Earth. "Alpha Group reports all ships ready. Beta Group confirms interception positions along the supply corridor. Gamma Group is standing by." "Understood," Alara said. She looked at Lieutenant Okafor. "Ravi, open a channel to all Alpha ships." "Channel open, Captain." Alara took a breath. She thought about Mira. She thought about little Sana and her purple stones and her twin moon nightlights. She thought about every human being on that colony below, sleeping in their beds, trusting that someone was watching over them. "All ships," she said, "weapons free." The Battle of Kepler 442 lasted 11 minutes. In galactic terms, that was not a battle. That was an execution. The first volley was devastating beyond anything the Draelith had imagined. The human mass drivers fired simultaneously, 140 ships releasing their kinetic rounds in a synchronized barrage that had been calculated down to the microsecond. The tungsten projectiles crossed the space between the fleets in fractions of a second, far too fast for the Draelith point defense systems to track. The Draelith shields were designed to absorb and dissipate energy. Plasma, particle beams, Radiation bursts. They were brilliant at it. They could take hit after hit from the most powerful energy weapons in the galaxy and hold firm. But a solid tungsten rod moving at a fraction of light speed was not energy. It was mass. And when that mass struck a shield designed for energy absorption, it did not dissipate. It punched through, like a bullet through glass. The first Dralith destroyer took 3 rounds amidships. The shield flickered for an instant, and then the rods were through, tearing into the hull with an impact force that the ship's structural integrity could not handle. The destroyer broke apart in a flash of atmosphere and debris, splitting into 3 pieces that tumbled away into the void. Before the debris had stopped spinning, 4 more ships were hit. Then 6 more. The kinetic rounds tore through the Dralith formation like a storm through dry leaves. Ships that had stood proud and intimidating moments earlier were crumbling, breaking, dying. Commander Thavik watched in horror as his tactical display turned from blue to red. Ship after ship went dark. His communications channels were flooded with damage reports, distress signals, and the screaming of crew members who were being exposed to vacuum as their hulls were ripped open. "Return fire!" he roared. "All ships, return fire!" The Dralith ships that were still functional opened up with everything they had. Plasma bolts streaked across the battlefield, striking the human vessels. And here, the Dralith received their second shock. The human ships absorbed the hits. Their hulls, that ugly, angular armor that looked so crude and inelegant, was layered with a composite material that dispersed plasma energy across its surface rather than concentrating it at the point of impact. The Draweeth plasma cannons, which could burn through the hulls of most galactic warships with a sustained burst, left scorch marks on the human vessels and nothing more. Thavik felt something he had never felt in his entire military career. He felt the cold grip of real fear. "All ships," he ordered, his voice cracking for the first time. "Fall back. Execute emergency hyperspace jump." But the human fleet had already anticipated the retreat. Captain Voss had positioned her ships to block the most efficient jump vectors. The Dralith ships that tried to flee found human warships in their path, cutting off their escape. Some tried to jump anyway, and the human vessels fired precisely targeted rounds that struck their hyperspace drives, crippling them before they could escape. Within 11 minutes, it was over. 30 of the 43 Dralith ships were destroyed or disabled. The remaining 13 had surrendered after their weapons were neutralized. Commander Thavik's flagship was one of the last to fall, its engines destroyed by a targeted strike that left the bridge intact but the ship dead in space. Thavik sat in his command chair, surrounded by silent officers, staring at a tactical display that was entirely red. His fleet was gone. Not beaten, gone. Eliminated by a species that the galaxy considered primitive. Ellora's voice came through the communication system one more time. "Commander Thavik, your ships are being disabled. Your weapons are offline. Medical teams are being dispatched to assist your wounded. We do not wish to cause further harm, but understand this clearly. Kepler 442 is our home. It will remain our home. If the Dralith send another fleet, we will destroy that one too. If you send 100 fleets, we will destroy 100 fleets. There is no number you can send that we cannot match. This is not a bluff. This is not emotion. This is a promise. Tell your leaders. Tell the Council. Humanity is done being told where it can and cannot live. At the same moment, the battle at Kepler was ending. The Beta Strike Group executed its phase of the operation. 120 human warships appeared along the main hyperspace corridor connecting Dralith space to the Kepler region. They did not engage any ships. They did not fire a single round. They simply appeared, lined up in a formation that made their numbers unmistakable, and sat there. The message was clear. This corridor is closed. No reinforcements will reach Kepler. No supply ships will pass through. The Dralith home systems were cut off from their territorial claim, and the force cutting them off was larger than the fleet that had just annihilated 43 warships in 11 minutes. The Dralith High Command received Commander Thavik's distress signal, and the Beta Group's blockade notification within minutes of each other. Fleet Admiral Gorath Sen, who had called humanity's military capabilities absurd, sat in his command center and stared at the reports in absolute silence. His staff watched him, waiting for orders. He gave none. For the first time in his career, Gorath Sen had absolutely nothing to say. But the operation was not over. There was one more phase, and it was the phase that would change everything. Gamma Group, the 52 ships that General Mbeki had positioned near the Thessara relay junction, activated their systems and made themselves visible to every sensor array in the region. The Thessara relay junction was not Drelith territory. It was Council territory. It was the central hub through which most galactic communications were routed. It was, in a very real sense, the nervous system of the Galactic Council itself. The Gamma Group did not attack the junction. They did not even approach it aggressively. They simply sat there, visible, armed, and waiting. And every member of the Galactic Council understood exactly what that meant. It meant that humanity could reach the Council. Not in years, not in months. Right now, today. The species they had dismissed, the species they had ignored, the species they had told to sit down and be quiet, had just demonstrated that it could put a fleet on the Council's doorstep whenever it wanted. Speaker K.L. Voren received the reports in his private chambers. He read them slowly. The Battle of Kepler, the Corridor Blockade, the fleet at Thessara. His aide stood nearby, trembling slightly with all four arms pressed close to his body. Speaker, the aide said, what do we do? K.L. Voren set down the reports. He looked out the viewport at the stars. For 200 years he had guided the Council with wisdom and patience and the unshakable certainty that he understood how the galaxy worked. That certainty was gone now, crumbled like ash in his hands. I do not know, he said quietly. I genuinely do not know. And across the galaxy, in the silence that followed humanity's strike, a single truth settled over every species, every government, every council member, and every military commander, like a cold, heavy fog. The humans were not ants. They never had been. Silence has a weight. Most species in the galaxy never learn this because they have never experienced the kind of silence that presses down on your chest and makes it hard to breathe. They have known quiet. They have known calm. They have known the gentle absence of sound that comes between conversations or after the engine shut down. But that is not silence. True silence is what happens when every voice in a room full of powerful beings stops at once because something has happened that none of them have the words for. True silence is what fills the space when certainty dies. And on the day the Galactic Council convened its emergency session to address what humanity had done, every single one of the 47 member species learned exactly how heavy silence could be. The Council chamber on Thessara Prime was the largest enclosed space in the known galaxy. It was a perfect sphere, 2 kilometers in diameter, carved from the living rock of the ancient world and reinforced with materials that had been old before most of the Council species had developed language. The seating rose in concentric rings from the central platform, each ring assigned to a different species based on seniority, influence, and military power. The Thessarans sat closest to the center, as they always had. The Drelith had the second ring, the Revan the third, and so on, outward and upward, until the youngest and least significant species occupied the highest, most distant seats, so far from the center that they needed magnification to see the speaker's face. Humanity did not have a seat. Humanity had never been given one. Minor species observed from a gallery above the highest ring, separated from the chamber by a transparent barrier that was both physical and symbolic. You may watch, the barrier said. You may listen, but you are not part of this. Ambassador Marcus Cole stood in that gallery now, looking down at the vast chamber below. He was Earth's representative to the Council, a position that had, until 3 days ago, been largely ceremonial. He attended sessions, he filed reports, he made polite requests that were politely ignored. He had spent 4 years in this role, and in that time, not a single Council member had asked him a question or sought his opinion on anything. That had changed. In the past 72 hours, Marcus Cole had received personal communications from the ambassadors of 31 Council species. Some were demanding explanations. Some were offering quiet congratulations. Some were asking, with barely concealed panic, what humanity intended to do next. He had responded to none of them. Secretary General Chen's instructions had been clear. Say nothing. Let them wait. Let the silence do the work. Below him, the chamber was filling. Species that normally sent junior delegates to routine sessions had dispatched their senior ambassadors. Some had sent their heads of state. Marcus could see the Thessaran speaker, K.L. Voren, already on the central platform, his silver face unreadable. Beside him stood the Drelith ambassador, a massive figure named Gorath Ven, who was Fleet Admiral Sen's cousin, and who looked like he had not slept in days. His scales had lost their usual luster. His eyes were dull. He moved like a creature that had been struck and was still trying to understand what had hit him. The session was called to order. Speaker Voron's voice echoed through the chamber, amplified by the acoustic design of the sphere itself. No technology was needed. The chamber had been built so that a whisper at the center could be heard at the highest ring. This emergency session of the Galactic Council is convened to address the events in the Kepler 442 system and related military actions by the species known as humanity, Voron said. His voice was steady, but Marcus, who had spent years studying the subtle facial expressions of Thessarans, noticed that Voron's lower eyelids were slightly contracted. It was the Thessaran equivalent of gritting one's teeth. 3 standard days ago, a human military force of previously unknown size and capability engaged and destroyed a Dralith naval detachment of 43 warships in the Kepler system. Simultaneously, human forces established a blockade along the primary hyperspace corridor connecting Dralith space to the Kepler region. Additionally, a human fleet of 52 warships was detected near the Thessara relay junction within Council sovereign space. The chamber was so quiet that Marcus could hear the faint hum of the environmental systems. The Council must now determine an appropriate response. The Dralith ambassador was the first to speak. Gorath Ven rose from his seat and moved to the speaking platform with the heavy, deliberate stride of his species. But his voice, when he spoke, lacked the commanding resonance that Dralith were known for. It was thin, almost brittle. The actions of the human species constitute an unprovoked act of war against the Dralith Dominion, he said. 43 ships destroyed, over 12,000 Dralith crew members killed. Our sovereign territorial claim, validated by this very council, was answered not with compliance but with violence. We demand that the council condemn humanity's actions. We demand reparations. And we demand that the council authorize a combined military response to bring this rogue species to heel. He looked around the chamber, expecting support, expecting the other species to rally behind him, as they always had when a minor species stepped out of line. The Dralith had been a pillar of the Council for centuries. They had fought alongside the Thessarans. They had trade agreements with a dozen major species. They were, by any measure, one of the most powerful civilizations in the galaxy. Nobody spoke. Gorath Ven waited. The silence stretched. 1 second, 5 seconds. 10, 20. Well, he said, and now his voice had a crack in it. Does no one support the Dralith position? Does no one condemn what was done to our fleet? A Riven ambassador, a small being with 4 arms and large, thoughtful eyes, stirred in her seat. Ambassador Ven, she said carefully, the Revayan collective sympathizes with the loss of Dralith lives. We do. But we must ask a question before we can respond to your request. Ask it. Ven said. Where did the human fleet come from? The question hung in the air. It was the question that every species in the chamber had been asking themselves for 3 days. Where had the humans hidden 400 warships? How had they built them? How had they developed technology that could defeat Dralith's shields? And perhaps most importantly, how had the Council's surveillance, which was supposed to monitor humanity's development, missed all of it? Ven opened his mouth, closed it. He did not have an answer because there was no answer. The Dralith intelligence services were still trying to understand what had happened. Their best analysts were going through the wreckage of the battle at Kepler, trying to piece together the technology the humans had used. And every report that came back was more disturbing than the last. The kinetic weapons alone were a revolution. No species in the galaxy used kinetic weapons anymore. They were considered obsolete, a relic of primitive warfare. Every major civilization had moved to energy-based weapons because they were more elegant, more precise, more controllable. The idea of going back to throwing physical objects at each other was considered barbaric. It was the equivalent of bringing a rock to a laser fight. But the humans had done something with that rock. They had refined it, perfected it, turned it into something that could punch through the most advanced energy shields in the galaxy because those shields had literally never been designed to stop it. It was so simple that it was brilliant. So obvious that no one had thought of it. The question, the Revan ambassador continued when it was clear that Ven had no answer, is not only where the fleet came from. The question is, what else do they have that we do not know about? That question sent a visible ripple through the chamber. Ambassadors shifted in their seats. Aides whispered to each other. The comfortable assumption that the Council knew everything about every species in the galaxy had been shattered, and the pieces were sharp. Speaker Voren raised a hand for order. The Council acknowledges the Dralith request for a combined military response. Before we vote, I open the floor for additional perspectives. A Thessaran military advisor, a decorated officer named Centario, stepped forward. She had been asked by Voren to provide a strategic assessment, and she had spent the last 3 days doing nothing else. Speaker, Council members, she began. I will be direct. A combined military response against humanity is inadvisable. Gorath Ven's head snapped toward her. Inadvisable? They destroyed our fleet. Yes, Tariel said. In 11 minutes. With technology we did not know they possessed, using tactics we did not anticipate, from positions we did not detect, and that was 140 ships. Our intelligence now suggests they have over 400, with an unknown number of additional assets in reserve. She activated a holographic display in the center of the chamber. It showed a reconstruction of the Kepler battle, with the human ships appearing out of nowhere and the Dralith formation dissolving in seconds. The human kinetic weapons bypass our standard shield technology. Their hull composition is resistant to plasma weapons. Their stealth capabilities exceed anything in the Council's current inventory. And their tactical coordination suggests a level of military preparation that spans at least a decade. She let the battle replay run to its conclusion. The chamber watched in disturbed silence as the last Dralith ship went dark. If the Council authorizes a combined response, we would be sending our fleets against an enemy we do not understand, with weapons we cannot defend against, using strategies we cannot predict. I cannot recommend that course of action. Gorath Ven was trembling now. Whether with rage or fear, it was hard to tell. So we do nothing? We let them defy the Council? We let a minor species dictate terms to us? Perhaps, said a new voice from the upper rings. The problem is that we called them a minor species at all. The voice belonged to Ambassador Yael Taran of the Sathani Republic. The Sathani were an old species, not as powerful as the Thessarans or the Dralith, but respected for their wisdom and their tendency to see things that others missed. Toran was elderly by Sathani standards, with deep lines on her face and eyes that had watched the Council make mistakes for over a century. I have been sitting in this chamber for 96 years, she said, and in that time, I have watched the Council make the same error over and over again. We see a new species. We measure them against our standards. We judge their technology, their numbers, their territory, and based on those measurements, we assign them a rank. Major, minor, insignificant. We put them in a category and we stop thinking about them. She leaned forward. We did this with the humans. We looked at their small fleet and their single colony and their young civilization, and we put them in the box labeled harmless, and then we ignored them. We ignored them while they studied our technology. We ignored them while they built a secret fleet. We ignored them while they developed weapons that can cut through our defenses like they are not there. We ignored them for a decade, and now we are sitting in this chamber, trying to figure out what to do about the consequences of our own blindness. I do not think the question before this Council is whether to punish humanity. I think the question is whether this Council is wise enough to admit that it made a mistake. The silence that followed was the heaviest yet. It pressed on the chamber like a physical force. Council members who had been preparing to support the Dralith request found themselves hesitating. The comfortable certainty that had defined galactic politics for millennia was crumbling, and no one was sure what would replace it. The Speaker Voren looked across the chamber. He read the faces of the ambassadors. He saw uncertainty where there had been confidence. He saw calculation where there had been assumption. He saw fear, though most of them would never admit it. Before we proceed, he said slowly, I believe we should hear from humanity directly. The words sent a murmur through the chamber. Hear from a minor species? In a full council session? It was unprecedented. Minor species observed. They did not speak. Speaker, Gorath Ven protested. Humans have no standing in this chamber. They are not members. They have no right to address the council. They have no right under our current rules. Voren agreed. But our current rules also assumed that minor species could not destroy a fleet of 43 warships in 11 minutes. I think we can agree that circumstances have changed. He looked up at the observation gallery where Marcus Cole stood. Ambassador Cole, will you address the council? Marcus looked down at the chamber below. Every eye in that vast sphere was turned upward, looking at him. 47 species, the most powerful civilizations in the galaxy, waiting for him to speak. He took a breath. He walked to the gallery's communication point, a small platform that extended slightly over the barrier. His voice would carry the same way the speakers did, amplified by the chamber's ancient acoustics. Speaker horror. Members of the council, thank you for this opportunity. He paused. He had prepared no speech. Secretary General Chen had told him to use his judgment when the moment came. The moment was here. I will not stand here and apologize for what happened at Kepler, Marcus said. His voice was calm but carried a weight that filled the chamber. I will not pretend that we regret defending our people. 18,000 human beings live on that colony. They are not soldiers. They are not conquerors. They are families. They built homes. They planted gardens. They named the hills and the rivers and the formations of stars they could see from their windows. It was their home, and this council told them to leave it because of a law written 4,000 years before any of them were born. He looked directly at Gorath Ven. We asked you to reconsider. You refused. We asked the council to intervene. It refused. We were told that our feelings did not matter, that only power mattered. He let those words settle. So we showed you our power, and now you are unhappy about it. He turned back to the wider chamber. I want to make something very clear. Earth does not want war. We did not build our fleet because we wanted to use it. We built it because we knew that someday someone would try to take something from us and expect us to accept it. We built it because we learned very quickly that the galaxy does not protect the weak. The galaxy consumes the weak. And we decided that we would not be consumed. He paused again. The fleet at Thesserar Junction has already withdrawn. It was never there to threaten the council. It was there to prove a point. That point has been made. The blockade along the Draelith corridor will be lifted as soon as we receive formal assurance that no further military action will be taken against our colony. We do not want the Draelith's territory. We do not want their trade routes. We do not want their seat on this council. We want only what every species in this chamber wants. The right to exist, the right to build, the right to live on the worlds we have made our own. He straightened his shoulders. But if that right is challenged again, by the Draelith or by anyone else, our response will be the same. We will defend what is ours. And I promise you, what you saw at Kepler was not the full extent of what we can do. It was a demonstration. Consider it a warning. He stepped back from the platform. The silence in the chamber was absolute. Not a whisper, not a movement. 2 kilometers of empty air between the highest seats and the central platform, and Marcus Cole could have heard a pin drop at any point in between. Speaker Voran stood on the central platform and looked at the faces of the council. He had presided over this body for 200 years. He had navigated crises between empires. He had brokered peace between species that had been killing each other for centuries. He had always known what to say. He had always known what to do. Now he stood in the silence and felt the full weight of his age. He thought about what Ambassador Torin had said, about the boxes they put species in, about the assumptions they made, and the consequences of those assumptions. He thought about the battle reconstruction he had watched, the Draelith ships breaking apart like they were made of paper. He thought about the human fleet sitting near his homeworld's relay junction, close enough to reach the council station in hours. And he thought about something else, something that had been nagging at him since the first reports came in. The humans had won the battle at Kepler overwhelmingly. They had complete superiority. They could have destroyed every Draelith ship. They could have left no survivors, but they had not. They had disabled the remaining ships. They had sent medical teams. They had treated the Draelith wounded. In the middle of a battle where they had every justification to show no mercy, they had shown mercy. That, more than the weapons, more than the stealth technology, more than the fleet they had hidden for a decade, was what made Kael Voran pause. Because mercy and victory was not the act of a primitive species. It was the act of a species that was disciplined enough to be terrifying and wise enough to know when to stop. He cleared his throat. The council will vote on the Draelith request for a combined military response. The vote was swift. 44 species voted against the Draelith request. The Draelith themselves voted in favor. 2 species abstained. The request was denied. Gorath Ven stood alone on his platform. looking at the vote tally. His jaw worked. His claws scraped against the speaking podium, leaving thin grooves in the ancient material. Then, without a word, he turned and walked out of the chamber. The Drelith delegation followed him in silence. Speaker Vorin watched them go. Then he turned back to the chamber. The Council recognizes the Kepler 442 system as sovereign human territory effective immediately. The previous ruling under Section 9 of the Territorial Accord is hereby overturned. Additionally, I am proposing a review of the Accord itself, as it is clear that our existing laws are insufficient for the realities of the current galactic community. He paused. And I am formally inviting humanity to take a seat on this council, not as a minor species, not as an observer, as a full member. The murmur that ran through the chamber was not one of surprise. It was one of inevitability. Everyone in that room knew this was coming. Everyone knew it was necessary. And everyone knew that the galaxy had just changed in a way that could not be undone. In the observation gallery, Marcus Cole gripped the railing. His knuckles were white. His heart was pounding. He had spent 4 years standing behind that barrier, watching, listening, being ignored. And now the Speaker of the Galactic Council was offering humanity a seat at the table. He thought about sending a message to Earth. He thought about asking for instructions. Instead, he looked down at Speaker Vorin and said simply, "We accept." On the Kepler colony, it was morning. The twin moons had set and the sun was rising over the crystal formations in the northern mountains, casting prismatic light across the valley where the colonists had built their home. Governor Vasquez stood in the central square, reading the message from Earth on her datapad. The council had reversed its ruling. The colony was safe. Humanity had a seat on the council. Around her, colonists were gathering. Word had spread fast. People were coming out of their homes, some still in their sleeping clothes, some carrying children on their hips. They crowded into the square, reading over each other's shoulders, listening as Vasquez read the key points aloud. When she finished, there was a moment of stillness. Then someone cheered. And then everyone cheered. People hugged each other. Some cried, some laughed. Some simply stood there, looking up at the sky they had been told they would have to leave, and felt the overwhelming relief of knowing they could stay. Vasquez looked at the faces around her, the farmers, the teachers, the engineers, the hunters, the children. They were not warriors. They were not soldiers. They were just people, people who had left everything they knew to build something new, on a world at the edge of nowhere, people who had been told they did not matter, and who had refused to believe it. She smiled. It was the first real smile she had allowed herself in 90 days. Across the galaxy, in the days and weeks that followed, the ripples of what had happened at Kepler spread outward like waves from a stone dropped in still water. The story was told and retold, on 1,000 worlds. The details changed with each telling, as stories always do, but the core remained the same. A young species had been wronged. They had asked for justice and been denied. So they had taken justice for themselves, with a precision and a ferocity that had left the oldest and most powerful civilizations in the galaxy speechless. Some species told the story with admiration. Some told it with fear. Some told it as a cautionary tale about the dangers of underestimating the unknown. But everyone told it, because it was a story that mattered. It was a story that changed things. On Earth, life went on. People went to work. Children went to school. The sun rose and set over cities and farms and oceans, just as it always had. But there was something different in the air. A quiet confidence. A sense that humanity's place in the universe was no longer defined by what others said about them, but by what they had proven about themselves. General Mbeki returned to her facility beneath the Rocky Mountains and began planning the next phase of Earth's defense program. The Blackthorn Fleet had been revealed, which meant it could no longer serve as a hidden deterrent. She would need something new, something the galaxy had not seen yet. She had ideas. Captain Elara Voss took shore leave for the first time in 2 years. She went to the Kepler colony and visited her sister Mira. She held little Sana on her lap and listened while the girl told her about the purple stones and the twin moons and the baby animals she had found near the river. Elara smiled and nodded and asked all the right questions, and she did not tell Sana about the battle. She did not tell her about the ships that had broken apart in the darkness above her nightlights. Someday, maybe, but not today. Today was for purple stones. Secretary General Chen sat in his office in Geneva and drafted a new policy framework for humanity's engagement with the galactic community. There would be diplomacy now. Real diplomacy. Not the one-sided arrangement where Earth asked and the Council ignored. A partnership of equals, or at least something closer to it. Ambassador Marcus Cole took his seat on the council floor for the first time. It was in the outer rings, far from the center, assigned to him based on humanity's short history in galactic affairs. He did not complain about the placement. He understood that respect was not given. It was built layer by layer, over time. But he noticed something as he took his seat. The ambassadors in the rings around him, species that had been in the council for centuries, did not look down at him the way they once would have. They did not dismiss him. They did not ignore him. They watched him, carefully, respectfully. And some of them, when he met their eyes, looked away first. Speaker Vorin called the session to order. Business resumed. Trade disputes, border negotiations, resource allocation. The endless machinery of galactic governance grinding forward. But there was something new in the chamber. A presence, an awareness, a seat in the outer ring occupied by a species that had been no one, had been nothing, and had changed the rules of the game in a single night. Marcus Cole listened to the proceedings. He took notes. He did not speak unless spoken to. He was patient. He was polite. He was everything the galaxy expected a new council member to be. But when the Draelith ambassador, a new one, Gorath Ven, having resigned in disgrace, glanced in his direction with something that might have been resentment, Marcus met his gaze and held it. He did not smile. He did not frown. He simply looked at the Draelith ambassador with the steady, unblinking calm of a species that had spent its entire existence fighting for survival against predators, against nature, against each other, and against the cold indifference of a universe that had never once made things easy. The Draelith looked away, and Marcus Cole, ambassador of Earth, representative of a species that the galaxy had once called insignificant, turned back to the proceedings and waited for the next challenge to come. Because it would come. Challenges always did. The galaxy was vast and old and full of powers that would test humanity again and again, in ways that could not be predicted. But humanity would be ready. It always was, not because it was the strongest or the oldest or the most technologically advanced, but because it was something the galaxy was only beginning to understand. It was relentless. It learned from everything. It adapted to anything. And it never, ever forgot. The council session continued. Voices filled the great chamber. Decisions were made. Alliances shifted. The galaxy turned. And in the outer ring, in a seat that had not existed 3 months ago, humanity sat in silence and watched it all with patient, steady, ancient eyes. Eyes that had looked up at the stars from the plains of Africa 100,000 years ago and wondered what was out there. Eyes that had never stopped wondering, never stopped reaching, never stopped pushing forward, no matter how many times the universe tried to push back. The galaxy had wanted silence from humanity. It got silence, just not the kind it expected.